Welcome back to The Thoughtful Therapist. I'm Jimmy Slaughter. This is a quiet space for thought and reflection. No therapy, no coaching, just shared thinking. If today's episode gives you something to sit with, I'd love for you to subscribe and follow along so you don't miss future conversations. Now let's take this one thought at a time. Today we're sitting with episode 2, a modest estimate of ourselves, including the good parts. So here's something I don't fully understand yet. What does it mean to be humble? I mean, I know the definition, right? Humble, having or showing a modest estimate of one's value or importance, not too arrogant, not self-important. But definitions don't always help us live inside an idea. I see this show up in really ordinary ways. I'll sit with someone who did something genuinely kind, competent, maybe even heroic. Maybe they helped a coworker. Maybe they handled a crisis well. And when I reflect that back, they immediately minimize it with anyone could have done that. It wasn't a big deal, really. And I always pause there because sometimes that is humility. And sometimes it's just discomfort with being seen accurately. So what does humility actually look like? Is it something that we earn? Something that we learn? Something we model? Or is it something that we just have or don't? I think about this sometimes through the lens of my years around youth football. When teams are formed and positions are assigned by coaches, not everyone gets to be the quarterback or the running back or the wide receiver or any of those other big high-end scoring jobs. Some kids end up on the line, some on defense, some in roles that don't get their name called very often at all. And I remember watching kids handle that in really different ways. Some would be very disappointed. You could see it. But they decided to make it work. They learned their position, they showed up, they played hard, even when the role wasn't glamorous. Others felt entitled to a certain position. And when they didn't get it, they were devastated, not just sad, but flat out disengaged. They'd stop giving their best, as if the role itself determined their value. I even remember parents yelling at coaches, convinced their child's talent had been overlooked somehow. I remember players who were given key scoring roles and then lorded it over others. And I also remember kids who were visibly nervous when they were trusted with something big. Not because they thought they were better, but because they were afraid they might not live up to it. And I think some of them were afraid that they might live up to it. Even then, it was clear. The difference between them wasn't talent. It was posture. Humility didn't look like pretending you didn't want the ball. And it didn't look like believing you deserved it either. It kind of just looked like showing up fully to the role they were given. Whether that role put them in the spotlight or asked them to do the dirty and necessary work that made everything else possible on the field. When I was younger, I had a mentor who explained humility to me once. It really stuck with me, and it still does to this day. He said that humility is the ability to stand among a crowd with no desire to be raised above them and no need to be pulled below them. And I love that idea. It doesn't really fit the textbook definition, though. What it points to is something we don't talk about enough. It suggests that humility isn't about seeing ourselves as less than. It's about seeing ourselves as no better and no worse than anyone else in terms of inherent value. No better and no worse. And that's where the phrase modest estimate gets complicated for me in our original definition. Because a modest estimate of myself should include all of me, right? My limitations, my triggers, my flaws, sure, they all exist. But so do my strengths. What I'm capable of, the skills I've worked to develop, the things that make me useful to others. So then I wonder, Is it humble to shrink myself so that others don't feel threatened? Or is it more honest to use my abilities the way they were meant to be used? To help, to assist, to step in when I can. Think about it like a group project, a big family decision, or even a work situation. You watch people struggle to take the lead, to organize, maybe make a big call, or even just keep track of what's happening. And you know you could help. You're not guessing. You've done this before. But you hold back, not because it isn't needed, but because you don't want to look arrogant or make someone else feel small or deal with the tension that might come from you stepping forward. So you decide to stay quiet. And later, things fall apart in ways you could have helped prevent. And that's the moment I get curious. Was that humility? Or was that fear wearing humility's clothes? People will judge our behavior. Sometimes they'll feel threatened or jealous, inadequate, maybe upset. But if I truly know what I did was right and that I was simply good at that thing, not better as a person, not more valuable than that person, just perhaps more skilled, then is their reaction my responsibility? Letting others' discomfort dictate our participation doesn't really strike me as humility. So maybe it would help to name what humility isn't. It's not appeasing others. It's not shrinking our abilities. It's not believing our value is higher than someone else's. And it's not compliance. It certainly isn't degrading ourselves or pulling ourselves down. And clinically, this matters a lot. I see people daily catalog every flaw they have, every single one, and they exclude their strengths entirely. Then label that humility. But is that humility? Or is it an escape designed as moral virtue, so it never has to be questioned? And sometimes that escape isn't driven by fear at all. It's carried by a deeper sadness or a persistent low mood, depression. When the internal world feels heavy or flattened, strengths don't just get overlooked. They can almost feel dishonest or exhausting to acknowledge. The flaw list flows effortlessly because it matches the dominant narrative of I'm not enough. And in those moments, what looks like humility is often the mood just narrowing your lens. One of my favorite exercises with clients is a really simple one, actually. I ask them to write a list of 25 reasons they're awesome. As I said that, a lot of people listening got real uncomfortable. But when I give this assignment in session, people, they'll laugh, they'll stall, they'll try to renegotiate the assignment. Can I do 10? Do they have to be big, real things? Does I try to do this count? Can I say 10 things I like about my body? What's fascinating is no one asks those questions when I ask for flaws. That list comes fast, which tells me something pretty important. For a lot of us, humility has become just erasing yourself. It's like being in court. The judge is there, the case is moving forward, all the evidence against you has been carefully prepared, every mistake, every regret, every failure. And then you look at your side, where that defense lawyer is supposed to be, and there's just no one there. No one showed up. Not because there's nothing positive to say, not because there aren't real reasons that you're valuable or redeemable, but because we never bothered to hire anyone to stand up for that side of our story. And that's what it's like when we refuse to acknowledge our strengths and label it humility. The case will proceed, just without a defense. And this leads us to the idea of disengaging. Disengaging is related to humility, but it's not in the same wheelhouse. Sometimes stepping back can be really honest. Sometimes it's even responsible. Maybe you think to yourself, I don't have the skill for this, but I'm going to pay attention. Or I'm not the right person to lead here, but I'll stay present. That kind of stepping back keeps us connected. It's almost like a purposeful retreat. But disengaging becomes something else when we shrink so much that we disappear. Disappearing sounds more like, it doesn't matter anyway, or they don't really want me here, or I'll just stay out of it. One posture keeps the relationship intact, the other quietly exits it. Clinically, the difference really does show up afterwards. When we step back well and appropriately, we return. We stay curious, we remain available, and we do so humbly. But when we disappear, there's no return, just a story we tell ourselves about why it was necessary. And sometimes, when we don't name what's happening honestly, the underlying emotion doesn't stay quiet. We can't really fool that feeling. Fear and sadness hardens. It turns into frustration, into cynicism, into a kind of low-grade anger that just feels justified or maybe even principled. We tell ourselves, we're just being realistic, or maybe discerning, or we're just above this mess. But underneath that edge is often vulnerability, a fear of being wrong, a fear of being seen. Maybe it's sadness over repeated setbacks or failures, or feeling fundamentally just not good enough. And that leads to anger, and that anger becomes armor. And it makes stepping back feel strong instead of vulnerable. It makes it seem smart, like it's the obvious thing to do. And it even tells us a comforting story. If I don't try, I'm not responsible for the outcome in any way. I know this pattern because I've lived it. I was a horrible student when I was younger. I mean, horrible. I was always in trouble. I even had special punishments in the classroom. I had to sit next to the teacher or keep my nose in a circle on the chalkboard in front of the whole class. I had glad and sad notes I had to bring home every day signed by my teacher so my parents knew how I behaved. I really started to hate to go to school. I felt so dumb. And I got really angry. I convinced myself that trying made no sense. It was actually easier and maybe even smarter just to be the bad kid that they all thought I was. And I remember having a few good teachers, shout out to Miss Tab, who believed in me. And I remember thinking that they were either dumb or just wrong. But I'll tell you what for sure, they scared me. Because they gave me hope. Because they demanded my best. I mean, think about that. They thought I had a best. That fear of failure and sadness turned into anger for me. And anger is really good at one thing. It clarifies. It justifies feelings. It removes nuance, and it says, that's it. I'm not going to do this. I'm not even worried about it. Whatever. But when the anger fades, our ego has to deal with that backlash. And if we're not careful, that armor doesn't just protect us anymore. It becomes who we are. I know this intimately. I spent years convinced that trying was absolutely pointless, that being the bad kid was way safer than risking hope and disappointment again and again. Anger isn't the problem per se, and that's not what I'm saying, but it's what happens when we stop listening to what it's trying to protect us from. I almost didn't say anything about where I ended up, which is so funny. And part of that is probably humility. But because I don't want to be an expert here, right? I just want to be a guy with ideas that I like to think about. But I did tell you how rough school was for me growing up. So maybe this will be my own little exercise in humility. Holding both things at the same time is probably important here. While I was a bad student back in the day, it took me about 20 years to finish, but I did eventually get my PhD. I was in school for 20 years. It reminds me of Tommy Boy, right? A lot of people take 7 years. Yeah, they're called doctors. For me, it just took a little longer than 7 years. And I don't wear that as a badge of honor. It's not proof of anything. It's just evidence that, staying present matters. Being present with all of it, all the good, all the bad, all the hardships, and making sure that defense attorney shows up. I don't think the difference is ability. I think it's deeper, more vulnerable emotions like fear, sadness, grief showing up however they show up. For me, it was just anger. For some, it's fear. For others, it's sadness, low mood, depression, weighing things down so heavily that even naming a strength feels impossible or just totally phony. What do you think it is for you? Fear of being wrong? Of being seen? Maybe it's a fear of hope. Finding out that we misjudged ourselves. Maybe we're not as good as we thought. Or maybe it's sadness over what we've lost or what we never had. Sadness of failing. Or the persistent sense that, again, we're just not good enough. Hope can even feel threatening because it stirs up grief or disappointment that we've learned to avoid. Sadness can flatten everything until the good parts feel out of reach or undeserved. Now, I'm not saying that forcing yourself to feel capable is what needs to be done, because I don't think that's true. But it does seem like staying honest about where we are, who we are, what we're capable of, and not disappearing entirely is potentially the essence of being humble. So when I ask myself, what am I protecting when I step back under the guise of humility? The answer isn't always noble. Sometimes I'm protecting myself from being seen clearly, sometimes from responsibility, sometimes from having to show up again next time. And what might I be abandoning when I do that? Because often it's not just the task, it's like my total participation. So then what is humility? Again, I don't think it's shrinking or self erasure. I think humility has something to do with staying present, but the whole truth of who you are, the parts you're good at, and the parts you're still learning, or maybe even just bad at. Sometimes that means leading, sometimes it's listening, sometimes it means stepping back, but not disappearing. Humility might just be staying fully in the room without needing to be above anyone and without disappearing below them either. And that does not mean knowing the right move every time. Just staying honest with, am I stepping back out of care or out of fear? I hope to return to this as my understanding of humbleness grows. I feel like it grows with some frequency, although in small chunks. But for now, this is where I sit with it. If this stirs something in you, I urge you to sit with it too. There's no need to resolve it today. Maybe even start making a list of 25 reasons you're awesome. It's a trip. Start small if you need to. One reason today, maybe another tomorrow. God, it's scary though. I wonder why. Thanks for thinking it through with me. I'm Jimmy Slaughter, the Thoughtful Therapist.